You go. Hello, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yes. So I always like to ask people kind of how they got into the field that they're in. So what was it that got you interested in psychology?
Well, that's always a loaded question in the field of mental health, isn't it?
People always say that every single time. Well, that's a lot. I mean, how much time do you have?
That too. I definitely have had my own anxiety, which is one of the reasons I wrote a book on the subject. And
Mhm.
also one of the reasons I have my perspective that this is a normal emotion that all of us have. How many people have you met who've never had anxiety, right?
Zero.
Zero. So, I think we're all in it together. And that's one piece of it. Another piece is that when you look at anxiety within mental health, it's the kind of thing that we have a lot of evidence-based strategies to deal with. But I
Mhm.
think a lot of that messaging is not really hitting the mark because of the way it's explained to people is very clinical. It's very
Yes.
academic. And I think that there are some nuance for how that message gets across that can actually make a big difference. And that's the reason I sort of got into this last stage of my career anyway, with regards to writing my new book.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but
Yes,
that's what
well,
I'm.
I love that. I was just having a meeting with some social workers who work for infant toddler services in my county, and we were just talking about like normalization, like how even other providers in their department are nervous about asking people about anxiety, depression, stress, adjustment, occupational therapists, physical therapists, dietitians are nervous because there's such a stigma behind it. And so we
Yeah.
feel like when we are feeling anxious about something, we're doing something wrong. And so it's just so great. The more people that can be like, no, we're all doing it. Hi, the better.
Yeah, I mean, let's get real with it. And I think that that's part of the issue is that the medical establishment certainly has done this, and I think psychology is also guilty of it to some
Mhm.
degree of
Mhm.
pathologizing normal states of anxiety. I mean, how many kids have anxiety? How many adults have anxiety? Especially, when people are going through life changes,
Mhm.
which I know this podcast tends to focus on certain very anxiety-provoking, massive life changes.
Yes.
Anxiety is going to follow you into those situations if you have a pre-existing higher levels of anxiety, of course that's going to happen even more. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that something's broken or wrong or that you're doing something wrong or that I think we have this standard that we're also always supposed to be happy and have peace and equanimity all the time, and it's just not realistic. So that's really part of my perspective on it.
Yes. Well, and that too, right? It's like if I'm not doing backflips gleefully, then
Right.
something's wrong. And sometimes being okay really is okay. And I don't know if we sell that message very much these days.
Yeah, I think we saw the opposite message that people need to rise always to the occasion with, like you said, with glee. And
Yeah.
it's not a realistic set of standards.
Yeah. Yeah. And even in that regard of like rest is productive. We're trying to get people on the rest movement. But if we're not constantly achieving, constantly what's next, what's next, what's next, and that causes people anxiety. Like, hey, I'm feeling really good in this role, in as a parent, in my whatever it might be. I'm doing something wrong. Or what's next? What's next? And it's like sometimes it's okay to just be where you are.
To just be, that's totally correct. I think, it boils down to control. We have this cultural need to always be in control, to always know exactly what we're doing next, and to be part of that perfectionism that we've been speaking about, having to do things perfectly and look perfect all the time.
Yes.
Is this need to always be in control. Anxiety cuts to the core of that in a
Hmm.
big way.
Hmm. Yeah. I took this training from someone called Karen Kleiman. She's kind of the godmother of postpartum depression. I think she
Right.
coined the term or is at least part of the team who is familiar with it. And she wrote a book called Dropping the Baby, and Other Scary Thoughts. And she talks about like anxiety and parenting and how some of it can be good. And of course, some of it can be counterproductive and maladaptive. And one of the examples she uses is stairs. So if you are recognizing anxiety holding your baby on the stairs, that's a good thing. You want to be a little more attentive to what you're
Hmm.
doing when you have a child in your arms versus when it was just you sat, carting yourself around. The problem then it becomes maladaptive when you won't go on the stairs because you're holding your child. And I've had that conversation with a lot of new parents, even that specifically of like, like I'm anxious, that means I'm doing something wrong. I'm anxious, that means it's bad. And it's like, well, some of that can be good. Some of that is your body saying like, hey, what's going on? Let's
Okay, so I 100% agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
I'll add something though. That
What?
pathological anxiety that you were mentioning, somebody who
Yeah.
won't go on the stairs at all,
Yeah.
that I believe that anxiety, even at high levels, is
Sure.
still an opportunity for the person to grow and enhance their relationships. And
Yes.
that's where my approach really comes in. There's
Mhm.
so many more people today experiencing those high levels of anxiety,
Mhm.
the anxiety that does get in the way of our productivity, of our thinking, of our, anxiety that really we shouldn't have, so to speak. I
Yes.
believe in those cases, still, there is a great opportunity that people have to develop themselves, to become more emotionally aware, more emotionally resilient, more
Mhm.
connected with other people, and really to put themselves forward, to move themselves
Mhm.
forward
Yeah.
in their lives. Anxiety is such a bad rap.
Yeah.
And we're very quick to even say like, oh, that's too much anxiety, or that's too much,
Yeah.
I don't know if I buy it anymore. I think that no matter how much anxiety we have, and we're all on that spectrum from low, medium, or high, we
Mhm.
can still use it in a positive way
Yes.
if we have the skills.
Yeah. Well, you recently posted on Instagram. I loved it. Anxiety is a signal, not a setback. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. Yes. Like,
That's
how
for
do you
sure the
recognize,
case.
like, oh, sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I said that's definitely the case. Thank you. First thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just curious, like, how can you, like, that's a really great little mantra. How do you help people kind of unpack that and conceptualize, like, what does that mean and how can we recognize it in our lives?
Okay. So often people feel anxious when they're feeling disconnected from other people, when
Mm-hmm.
they've been avoiding their emotions for a while, when they're creeping up on them and they're sort of not, haven't been thinking about themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
also when people have sort of stagnant in their life journey and they're not really moving ahead, all of these sort of larger than life issues can be a context for people to have a higher levels of anxiety. And in that regard, anxiety is actually like a hello, time to get more in touch with yourself, time to
Yes.
reach out to others,
Yes.
time to move on in your, proverbial path, whatever that might be. And you know, yeah, that it's a whole series of signals that we can choose to attend to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting that this is like the whole spectrum of emotion and the ways that we're taught and the external messages we hear about how we're supposed to be feeling and trying to figure out like any sort of emotion, kind of what we are talking about earlier, any sort of emotion that's not happy, joyful is bad. And being able to sit with kind of the tension of, no, this is a good thing because it's going to help you to reevaluate, maybe being more, I use the word intentional
It's
a hundred
great.
times a day.
I love
And so
that.
it helps you to be like, we've kind of been coasting. Let's be more intentional about focusing on whatever the task at hand or the next change might be.
Correct. Definitely. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I'm thinking about your primary audience here, in the perinatal period and people going through that. Let's be real. It's terrifying.
Oh gosh.
And I say that as a guy. So granted, like I don't
Yeah.
fully get it. Okay.
Noted.
But I do have 6 kids. So I've been there to some degree along the way.
Sure.
And it's terrifying. It's just
Mhm.
so scary. Like, what's going to be? All the medical appointments, all the checkups, all the uncertainty, all the lack of control. And then, like, it just gets worse
Yes. Yeah. Well, and it does,
along the
it's
way.
like, as you think about, like, you've got this newborn and it's terrifying because you're kind of to some degree afraid of breaking them, and which news, like, spoiler alert, you can't really break your children. It's okay, but I feel
Hard
like
to,
that conversation
right?
with people a lot too. And then they start moving, and then that's a new level of terror. And then even when you get into like the teen, do you mind me asking kind of what age ranges your kids are in?
Mine?
Yes.
Yeah, my oldest is 20, which is kind
Uh-huh.
of a trip, and my youngest is 8, and they're all
Yeah.
points in between.
Right. And so like at 8, that's a new thing, and 20 is a new thing, and
Oh my God. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many things. And my sense, one of the things that having kids I think brings to the fore is that if you really want to achieve something big, and let's talk about that, like having kids is enormous. It's a
Mm,
huge, just strive forward for all of the humankind, like the entire human race is literally advancing, but more so it's emotionally physically, spiritually, a just incredible experience that moves people forward, and can move people forward. And the fact that anxiety is gonna be part of that, I don't think is a coincidence. I think, anybody who's moving themselves ahead
Mhm.
in life, in a big way towards realizing, a figment of an imagination, a dream, and making that, into reality, they're going to face some struggles along the way. Anxiety is
Mhm.
going to be part of that process.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, I think it comes back to those external voices that we talk about again with the expectation that we just figure it out, or like a lot of times parents get a lot of anxiety with like connection with a baby because you have this child, especially for birthers, living inside you, and then here they come, and you may not feel this immediate connection, or even if you feel the connection, you don't immediately know what to do. It's not a natural instinct of like, oh, this is when the baby needs burped, and this is when the baby needs change, and this cry means
Right.
that, and that cry means that, and feeling people, I've recognized a lot of my clients kind of feel like failure, lowercase, uppercase F, failure in some sort of way because they don't have those natural instincts, which then produces more anxiety.
100%. So some level of anxiety, apprehension, uncertainty, struggle is going to happen. But what really makes it worse is when we see that and we see our struggles as a failure.
Yes.
That layer of judgment on top
Mm,
is what really sends people down into the abyss. And I think
mm,
that's happening more and more today, with everything shiny and wonderful on social media, and also where people are a little bit more disconnected from actually achieving big things in their world, in their
yeah.
life. So now, like, you're doing it, you're there, pregnant, having a baby, like raising a kid, and
Yeah.
it's a big deal. So it's gonna be unmooring at times. It's a foreign feeling. It's like, I
Mhm,
think it used to be
mhm.
something in the last century, certainly people used to have all the time. Like, oh, I'm building a business, I'm, getting a degree. I don't, I'm the first person in my family to do that. Like, it's all this sorts of new stuff. I think today we have a lot less of that, and we're not used to these struggles,
Mhm.
as much as we used to be.
Mm. No, that's very true. That is absolutely, I get that as well. And we talk about that. I'll say it at the end of my podcast. Anybody who's listened knows that that's how I end, but I say be curious, not judgmental, which I got from Ted Lasso. And I really do encourage people. I say it all the time. Like, if you are recognizing any sort of thought of feeling, get curious, sit with it, ask yourself questions instead of saying I'm a failure because, or I'm doing it wrong. That judgment piece. I mean, we're struggling twice then when we've already got the negative situation happening, and then we judge ourselves on top of it. How difficult that is, and instead being able to ask those questions or reach out, like you mentioned too, with the kind of feeling isolated, finding people that you can talk to or get some support from.
Yeah, love it. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, of course, again, that goes into a whole other tangent that we may or may not get down at some point. But like this proverbial village, like it takes a village to raise a child, but we're so physically, emotionally separated from people these days. We don't live generationally anymore.
Yeah.
We move for jobs, etc. And so how we talk about it takes a village, and sign me up. Where's the village? I'd be happy to.
Right. Most people don't have, it's a rare thing for people to have, aside from like very specific, unique cultural enclaves within the United States. It's a rarity, and becoming increasingly rare, where people moving to big cities, people moving away, like you said, job mobility, for a variety of reasons, has people raising children essentially in isolation,
Mhm.
which is all the more important, all the more challenging. Um, there are online communities, like there are ways to remediate that to some degree, but it's not the same.
No.
It's not the same. And I think because of that, we have to be even more permissive, not permissive, more compassionate, more
Mhm.
compassionate. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
More compassionate towards ourselves and understanding that this is gonna be a ride.
Yes. Yes, it's not something that is, there are certain things that certainly feel innate to different various levels, but that it's not always intuitive. It's not, maternal instinct. It's that.
Oh God, no. I mean, maybe like after, like, for a veteran, mom or dad, after like 20, 30 years, you have a couple of moments here and there. But like, I don't know if that's the case for anyone accomplishing big things. Like if you look at marathon runners, like
Sure.
professional marathon runners, like
Mhm.
2 hour, 2:15, 2:30.
Quiet. Oh, hold on, wait, you muted yourself.
Oh, that's not good. See, I've been on like 50 podcasts and I still hit the mute button. So anyhow, you look at professional people doing all sorts of incredible things, athletes. If you really talk to them, and I have in private practice and
Sure.
elsewhere, they're like, yeah, I feel like a total failure. I couldn't believe that happened. It was just luck, the other things, and like, there's so much more. There's so much more chance. The truth is, they're wrong in many cases. Like it was just a great day on the court, or
Yeah,
like they
right.
just, the weather just picked up that day, or they had a second wind, or whatever it was,
Right.
or nutrition just they happen to be well rested, and like there are so many of these idiosyncratic factors that will shape our experience day to day. And I think we're very focused on achievement as opposed to the process, uh,
Hmm.
which is messy.
Yes. That I really that's interesting. Focus on achievement instead of the process, right? And we're thinking about like, if I do this for my 6-month-old, then they'll walk faster, then they'll talk sooner, then they'll get into the better grade school, then they'll right. And it's like we've catastrophized to them failing out of college because they're not walking at 12 months
Right.
and that anxiety that we place upon ourselves or our partners, even because I have clients who
Yeah.
talk about oh, I saw on TikTok this kid's walking at this, and why isn't ours walking? And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. One day at a time, every baby is different, every situation is different. And like you're saying, even with marathon runners, you slept weird last night, or your Gatorade was the wrong, was
Yeah,
whatever it may
for sure,
be.
for sure, for sure. Pick the wrong thing, and it just happens. The shoes like didn't end up showing up the way they were. I
Yeah.
mean, like there's so many things that can come out of the blue, and I think that's the case again. Whenever you're doing a big deal, like whenever you're involved in a big project, having kids is a big project, by the way.
Yes.
So whenever you're involved in that, things are going to, the wheels are going to come off at some point. It's going to
Right.
be a mess.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, how do you help people in those situations, like in your practice with the anxiety center,
Yeah.
just kind of generally, and in your book, we'll definitely get to more about that as well. But like, how do we help people kind of take things a step at a time, take a step back, non-judgmentally, ask the questions, not catastrophizing with the anxiety, using it as a signal, but kind of staying in the here and now. It's really easy to kind of spiral.
It is. It's totally easy to spiral. I think what gets us there more than anything is when we haven't done level setting. And
Mm,
the level setting is that it's not always going to look good all the time. We're not always going to feel good all the time. It's going to be a struggle. And especially if you're achieving something big, it's going to be tough. There are going to be really challenging moments, days, weeks, months, who knows? And having anxiety, struggling with it. I think one of the things for parents especially is when their kids start to feel anxious. They're like, I'm a
yes.
failure of a mom.
Oh
I'm the
gosh,
worst
yes.
dad.
Yes.
Like, what's wrong? Like, I've let down my kid. I've let down the world. And no, like, no, that is not true. We have to level set that, like, people are gonna feel anxious, uncomfortable, have tantrums sometimes. Like, this is part and parcel of being human. There are ugly, challenging moments that we go
Mhm.
through. Once we can accept that, and once we understand that, just once we like, oh, right, duh, like, I think that's huge in terms of getting us to a place of less aggravation and
Yeah.
less anxiety about our anxiety.
Yes, anxiety about our anxiety. Well, that's very true as well. And yeah, I was reading something, I think it was on Instagram, and it was like, how do you help a child with anxiety? It's like help their parent to feel less anxious and
I love that. Well, what happens often is the kid starts to feel a little anxious.
Ah,
Why? Well, because they're human and they're a kid and they're out of control, and they don't know what's going to happen next, and it's uncertain, and life is challenging. So that's what it is. The parent looks at the child and says, like, you're anxious. So now the kid learns, oh no, when I feel this way, something's wrong.
yes.
That
Yes.
literally dumps more adrenaline into their system.
Yes.
They have actually created a cascade of anxiety. Now the
Mhm.
parent sees the kid even more anxious and goes, "Oh no!" So they're ping ponging off of each other, and this is like every house in America.
Yes. Yeah, it really is. And I love that visualization too, the ping ponging. Like if you react instead of respond to that and they see you reacting, then they realize there's something wrong. And then they might even and then internalize it like, well, if I can't tell my parents that I'm anxious about this because then it's
Yes,
gonna upset
they
them.
try
And
to
so
hide
then
it. They
yes.
try to hide it. Then they try to stuff it away. Then they don't want to feel it. And we know from clinical science that just makes it worse. That only makes the anxiety build. So
Hmm.
the anxiety keeps building and building, and then they want to hide it even more. And then they try to show it. And then the parents freak out because they're
Yes.
not used to seeing it. And I'm like, oh no,
Yeah.
this is like the story across the board. And it's unfortunately a narrative that is not working out in our country's favor.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you encourage people to do in those moments, kind of working through the discomfort, recognizing, okay, I'm anxious. What does that anxiety training protocol kind of look like of
Perfect.
getting
Yeah.
through?
Number one is going to, it really is going to be acceptance. Again, as I've been saying until now, ad nauseum perhaps, that we need to accept we are going to feel anxious. Our kids are going to feel anxious. Our partners are going to feel anxious. Our neighbors are going to feel anxious. Our friends. This is part of life. So let's cement that into our brains and understand if you don't feel uncomfortable, something is wrong. In fact, I'm actually more concerned about my non-anxious patients than the ones who are anxious, to be perfectly
Sure.
true. Oh yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, they're usually either have an alcohol problem or they're deeply narcissistic or like something's neurologically very wrong. But it is
Sure.
not a good sign. I'd
Right.
much rather be dealing with anxiety, which I do most of the time.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's one. Now comes the art of using our anxiety to thrive in positive ways.
Hmm.
And this is where I think the opportunity of anxiety lies.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So
Yes.
that's what I was gonna say. I was wondering about like, I don't know. I'm going back to the normalization piece of it, right? Like it's okay to be upset, to concerned. And I actually just had a person on who was talking about like sobriety and the urge to numb out or the even the
Sure.
encouragement societally for many parents, but like the mommy wine culture specifically, and how if
Yes.
you're feeling these things, the best thing to do is to numb out and instead of sitting with that tension and finding a way. Of course, obviously I'm biased because I'm a therapist, but to get therapy to work through it, to find a way to deal with it, it's just, well, numb out, keep going, be a superwoman, super mom, keep figuring it out and use the wine to get through.
Yeah, it usually catches up with it actually always catches up with people to take that approach that I've seen.
Mhm. It does.
Listen, I mean, everyone's got their vices and everyone's got has to have their ways of like de-stressing and relaxing, but typically a more appropriate, more functional, healthy way of dealing with anxiety is to actually think about like, why was I feeling so stressed today? Like, what is going on? And here's one, try this one on for size. Talk to your partner, talk to a friend about what's on your mind, as opposed to drinking it away, talk to a therapist, like actually have that deep conversation. Usually when people have those conversations, it opens up a connection with that person that they never would have had,
Mm.
right? Who are you closest to? I bet you it's the people who you've cried on their shoulder or, opened up to about whatever it
Well,
is.
I vulnerability really is, I think, the
Hmm.
thing that opens us up to the closest connection. And I literally have started saying, even to my husband, to say, like, I need to come to you in a really vulnerable space and have this discussion about something. And
Awesome.
in those moments, I feel are the ones where I mean, nothing is ever perfect. And oh, we had this conversation one time and everything's magically better. But
Right.
where I feel like there's been a real pivot point, at least in the right direction, because I've been able to express, like, I'm not gonna drink this away with some red wine or pretend it's not happening and build my resentment. I want to set a boundary and be vulnerable or express it and be able to work through it. And you're right. And that's when you feel the most connected is when you're able to be your most authentic self.
Almost always.
It
Almost
almost
always.
is, yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Very
that's
rarely is
exactly.
any one thing all one thing. I say that all the time too. Like not a lot of always and nevers,
I mean,
but
it
a
does
lot of,
assume that one's partner is willing to actually go
right.
there as well and catch you, when you show that vulnerability.
Uh-huh.
But, hopefully, and usually that's the case. I mean, if you're in a loving relationship and you actually care about each other,
Mhm.
getting those defenses up, we call it the fight or flight system for a reason. It often comes from anxiety, and people get their defenses up and they're fighting and they're arguing, or they're saying like, I don't need you. It's just that you're an idiot because you did X, Y, and Z, as opposed to like, hey, I'm really having a hard time right now and I could really use some help.
Yes.
Play that card. It means leaning into the anxiety,
Uh-huh.
because I'm feeling uncomfortable right now, but I need that help. That is usually the ticket to having greater emotional intimacy,
Mhm.
connection, and enhancing our relationships.
Yeah. And that's really interesting too. You were mentioning like asking for help. I have a lot of clients and personal acquaintances and friends as well. Like we've been raised, our Oregon Trail millennials, especially raised of like girl power, you can do anything, reach for the stars, all of that. And so we were taught like achieve, achieve, achieve. And so I see a lot of people having trouble asking for help because in that way it implies that you are not the perfect mother, not knowing what you're supposed to do, not having it all together. And it's okay, but I don't think people understand that you can grant yourself that permission.
I love the way you're saying it right now. Firstly, I'm all about girl power. I've got two girls myself, and definitely want to empower them, and see them doing great things.
Yes.
With that said, when it comes to emotional connection, there's a very different skill. It's like a different gear in your gearbox,
Mhm.
like gears 3 and 4, where you're on the highway and you're like, getting your engines revved and you're moving and grooving. Showing that vulnerability isn't necessarily a good thing. Like if you're in the office, like you want to take charge, do what you got to do, like be on time, get things done. And like that's a great set of skills to be able to do. But there's also these lower gears.
Mhm.
There's gear 1, and then there's gear 2, and then there's these other um positions that beget a greater emotional connection.
Mhm.
Anxiety helps us to get into those gears
Mhm.
by slowing things down and by saying, hey, I really don't have everything figured out. I
Mhm.
actually do need help right now. I want to connect with you because I don't want to be alone. And those are very different than like, I got this,
Right.
It's a very different
Right.
place.
Right. And it's been interesting. And many people said where when we're recording at the time of recording, it's kind of the winter holidays are upon some of
Yes.
us. And a lot of either default caregivers, birthing people, maybe one and the same, are often in charge of creating the magic of the holiday in a number of ways. Um, and this is applicable 365, but I think it's even more so around the times of birthdays and other special events.
Yeah.
And so people ask for help and sometimes finally get to the space and then they find that it's not being met the way that they want. And like I'm trying then to help people to understand like how do we temper our expectations in a way that's not letting yourself down, but also not being I'm trying to think of how to say like having your expectations be met, but also feeling like you can ask in a way that's meaningful and direct, but not having to be in charge of the list all the time. I don't know how I'm trying to say this. Like,
I think what you're saying is that a lot of holiday stress can mount at this time of year.
yeah,
And
that's why I'm not being able to complete a sentence right now.
I love that. And yeah, the lists get really intense and the expectations get really high. And there's this sort of requirement to like, be the mom, be the running the
Mhm,
house and making everything, great, and have these, magical memories of the holidays that you're, creating.
mhm,
Um, and all of that, when it piles up, can be intense, but that can be used, I believe, to connect more.
mhm,
If it comes to like, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now and I could use some time together, I need a bit of a break from this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. I need some help with this, that, and the other. And, you know, those can be leaning into the anxiety and like being aware of it, being aware of one's stress, and then using it to create connection. I
mhm,
think that's where the opportunity is.
mm. You being aware of the anxiety and the stress and using it to create connection. I mean, I just really I like the idea of that and again coming back to that being intentional piece. Like I'm
Mhm.
not just floating through. I'm not just figuring out as I go by, but not asking for help, I'm saying like, I'm not okay, and here's how I can get help, or I am okay in this way, but not in that way. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I love that.
yeah. So tell me about thriving with anxiety. What just led you to be like, I got to put this into a book? Your experiences, what was that like for you?
Okay, so I'll tell you what happened. During the pandemic, I saw something really interesting. Had 500 or 600 active patients at Center for Anxiety at that time.
Mhm.
And I was really concerned. I was like panicking, like, what's going to be with all these people under my care and under the care of my staff? And what was pretty amazing was that the patients who were in care before the pandemic started, January, February, beginning of March 2020, they actually did fine. They did fine.
Wow.
Yes, they did not have that bump of anxiety in April, May. In fact, just today, I got the notification that the journal Plus One is going to be accepting yeah, literally today. I got that in my inbox.
Kids, that's
Yeah,
huge.
thanks so much. Yeah, yeah, really excited about it. So
Wow.
forthcoming science right
Yes.
here on the Perinatal Podcast. And anyhow, the individuals who struggled the most were those who had never had anxiety beforehand. They had never had treatment beforehand. Because they're like,
Oh,
what is this? Something must be wrong with
sure.
me, and I don't have the skills to deal with this. So that's when it's like all the way up. But if people had it beforehand, they're like, oh, this is not that different than what I've had in the past. They didn't have that bump in April and May of 2020.
Fascinating. And you know what? It makes sense. It makes sense. Like, well,
Yeah,
yes, if I've had this before, this is new, it's on a different level. And also here's what I know has helped me in the past versus, yeah, like this is all foreign to me.
correct.
How do I navigate?
Yeah. So in that regards, anxiety can actually be a blessing because it can help us to build our resilience. It can help us to build our relationships. It can help us to, understand that anxiety is part and parcel of the human experience and not judge ourselves for that. And once we get those messages in place, we can actually use it in very constructive ways. And that's what the book is about, how to use the anxiety in a positive way
Hmm.
instead of running from it.
Yeah. That's so great. Do you have any sort of activities or skill in the book? What does it kind of help people as they're
Oh
reading?
yeah. Oh my God. So yeah. So each chapter, 9 chapters, 9 skills, and each or 9 tools, and each chapter has a combination of like explaining what the concept is with cases that we dealt with,
Mhm.
and writing up cases. So each one will have like 2 or 3 or 4 different stories of different patients who came to our office,
Mhm.
plus the core concept, and then each one ends with a practical skill for how to use your anxiety in a constructive way.
Mm.
But I'm done like running from anxiety, and I'm done trying to tell people, yeah, we're going to get rid of it. Don't get rid of it. Like change your relationship with it, learn how to use it in a positive way in your life. And that's what the book is about.
Yeah. Well, again, we just have been programmed, I guess, to understand that negative emotion is, I mean, negative. So there I am even saying it, like
Yeah.
emotions that are not cheerful.
Unpleasant.
Yeah, that are not under the cheerful umbrella are to be avoided, run from, suppressed, ignored. And I mean, they're there for a reason and they can be helpful if we're paying attention.
100%. They are unpleasant, by the way. I'm not saying that anxiety is fun. Like
Oh,
no one
sure.
likes to feel anxious, myself included. It is not fun. It is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's painful. It is. No one's saying it's joy. I'm not confusing this, and I'm not mislabeling it either. But therein lies the opportunity in anxiety. The fact that it's a struggle, I think, is exactly what makes it possible to use it to become vulnerable, to parlay that into resilience. You can't build resilience without resistance. It's just
Hmm.
the way it is. It's math.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking again about like you were talking about the people who were experiencing anxiety and seeking treatment for it before the pandemic and how they were able to coast through that, or like, excuse me, not coast,
No,
get,
well, they didn't coast, but they definitely didn't have like a
yeah,
massive.
they were able to utilize the skills that they had already started to build upon to use
Correct.
those as they went through. I absolutely misspoke there by saying coast, as though anyone goes through their mental health. But I'm thinking the same thing about perinatal mental health, right? So if you're acknowledging and recognizing any sort of history that you have with anxiety, which we all do, to what various levels, and if you're trying to work through that, then you might be able to get on a space where you're able to work through that during trying to conceive, if you have fertility struggles, during the
Yeah.
actual pregnancy, if you've had, and one of the big things that I see in a lot of my community is pregnancy after loss and the anxiety that comes
Pregnancy
with that,
loss. Um,
right? I'm pregnant again and I'm taking 3 tests a day to make sure that the line
yeah.
is staying dark, or just in general, all of those concerns about pregnancy after loss and potential subsequent losses. And then, of course, like we were talking about, trying not to break an infant.
Yeah. Love it.
Those things.
Yeah, a couple things there. I've definitely had my share of patients who, like female patients who I saw in their late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, who really had to work through some intense anxiety. And we used exposure therapy. You know about exposure therapy?
Yes, sure.
Where they're facing their fears head on and it's really intense, but they're building a lot of resilience and leaning into that fear, leaning into their anxiety with,
Mhm.
very, very substantially during treatment. And when it came time later on in life to start a family, they were some of the calmest moms around
Mhm.
because they're like, oh, I built this muscle. Like I went through this
Yes.
challenge. I voluntarily faced my biggest fears and understood that anxiety is not going to kill me. I can have high levels. It's kind of like, I'm going to go back to marathon running. Like the people I know who run competitively, who trained in high school, they're a lot more able to do it just because they know, like their body's like, oh, I can push really hard here and it's actually going to be okay.
Mm.
It's like a
Yes.
muscle, right? Like it's not going to kill me. Like, but if you didn't do that when you were younger, if you haven't had that experience, it's like, oh my God, what's going on here? This is not how it should be.
Yes.
When that's not true. It's
Yes.
actually, you know, just increasing your lactate threshold just really is painful. It kind of sucks.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's gonna hurt because that's what you're doing, is tearing down that muscle and rebuilding it in
Yeah,
ways that are gonna be more meaningful. And yeah, I like that idea too, though. The more that I mean, I agree with that in everything, obviously, physical movement, marathon training, but mentally as well. You're building that skill, you're building that muscle, you know that you can get through it because you've done it before, instead of just ignoring it and kind of white knuckling your way through it.
right.
Yeah. And that is interesting too, because like I said about, the trying to conceive and fertility concerns and all of those things, it's the anxiety that you sit with does not help your pregnancy become any more viable. And so finding ways to help yourself get through that, through connection, through, therapy. Obviously, again, I'm biased because I'm a therapist, but being able to utilize those skills and resources that might be available to you so that you are feeling your best throughout that time as well.
Yeah, there's another piece there, especially I think when it comes to pregnancy and pregnancy loss, and which is the inherent uncertainty and uncontrollability of the pregnancy process and the
Yes.
birthing process and
Yes.
the health of children. I mean, these are matters which are very difficult to have a direct human influence over.
Yes.
And I think that it's normal for people to have anxiety when they don't have that level of control or that level
I was
of
just saying,
knowledge
you've
or
been
that
talking about
uncertainty.
control since we started talking, and that's exactly why we have anxiety in a number of ways, because we can't control.
Correct. But what the difference between somebody, put it this way, I'll take a very sort of simple analogy. Somebody who sits on a plane and has a phobia versus somebody who sits on a plane and they're like, okay, whatever. They're able to be like, I'm not in control here. The latter person is able to be like, okay, I'm not in control of where the plane goes, where, I don't know where it's gonna go. I'm not gonna calculate it. I'm just sort of like, that's for the pilot beyond the armored flight deck. And like,
Yes.
that's not my place. Like, I'm here. And that's, I think, always something I think about when I get onto a plane. Like, how much control do I pretend or think that I have when I'm not on a plane? Like, when I'm here, I actually know. Like, I'm not gonna fly the
Interesting.
plane. You
Yeah. That's interesting, right? Like, where I know that I don't have any control there, but I like to pretend like I have control other places when I also
outside,
really
like
don't.
in
Fascinating.
in the terminal, I was like, I got this. Like I'm here, and like
Yeah.
in reality, I don't. In reality, we never really are fully in control of anything. And in some ways, that's part of the magic of having kids, is like you're sort of learn to become more surrendered
Yes.
to
Yes.
that process, which is an important life lesson.
Do you feel like, obviously in your own personal experience with 6 children, but also in your professional experience, do you feel like that kind of the anxiety starts to come down some? Is it very individualized, like as you have more children, or does it change and shift based on like, well, now what do I do because I have 3 kids and how do I get them all in the car at the same time? Like, what has been your
Okay,
experience with that?
great question. Okay, so many years ago, I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, my wife and I went to this family. Like they invited us over for dinner, for lunch, or whatever it was. So we went, and I think we had 2 kids at the time. And we saw like they had like 8 kids or something like that. And she was holding a newborn who had just been born 6 weeks earlier.
Hmm.
So I looked her in the eye and I said, "You're insane. Why am I at your house?"
Yeah.
And she, yeah, like, yeah, right. Like, what was she thinking? Having us over. And she's like, "Oh, you don't understand. Once you had like 6 or 7, you're just like, okay, like, who cares? A couple more." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this is, you're a unique creature." But
Yeah.
she really was chilled. She was
Yes.
not uptight, and things were not perfect. And it
Mhm.
wasn't, immaculately done. Like this wasn't like a state affair in any way. This
Mhm.
was a very
Mhm.
just chilled out meal that we had with them. Very lovely meal.
Yes.
And I think that often parents of 1 or 2, maybe even 3 kids are like, how do you do that? But it actually does get easier. I'm not
Huh.
saying everyone should go out and, end up with grand multi, families. Like that's a lot. Like I get
Yes.
it. And, mine certainly pushes the limits of what can fit into a minivan.
Right? I
Right?
like that though, if you can take that energy of like, take the energy of having 8 children. I have 2 and I'm all set on that number, but also being like, but you've come to see me, you've come to spend time with me. You don't necessarily care about my house unless I'm Martha Stewart, in which case, yeah, you probably are coming to look at the house. But also I have people who can
Fair enough.
come and get ready for you. But you're not coming to look at my house. You're coming to eat edible food, but you're not necessarily here to see my award-winning dishes, but we're here to spend time. And I wish that people could get to a space where they could, I like to use the expression like unclench, like,
Love
like,
that.
right? Like I just let's unclench. Let's just live life on life's terms, that it's chaotic and messy and that perfection doesn't exist, but yet we continue to search for it. We continue to seek it and really trying to internalize stepping that back. It's not going to happen. Just enjoy the moment, enjoy the chaos of
Enjoy the chaos. Yeah.
14
Or
children
embrace
running
it.
around.
Yeah. 14 is a lot. That's where I draw the line. I'm
Yes,
just
yeah,
kidding. I'm
yeah,
just kidding. But my, point taken of embracing the chaos at least. And I do think that it actually does get easier over time. I will say that my personal experience, and my wife has said this too, that it does get easier over time to a point. I mean that at a certain point things do catch up with you, and everyone has to know they're online.
mhm,
But I actually do think that 3 and 4 in some regards is easier than 1 and 2.
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I appreciate you so much for coming in and chatting with everybody. I really, again, normalizing mental health, normalizing anxiety is something that this is what the show is really about, is to help people to feel supported and connected, even if it's in a virtual way, just by listening to our voices. And for having somebody with such an expert situation in
Thanks.
anxiety, it's really helpful to have that voice.
Thanks so much. A real honor and pleasure. Great conversation. And
Yeah.
your listeners
It'll
like
be
it.
in the show notes, of course, but where can everybody find you?
Oh yeah, my website. In fact, I have a free giveaway. We have a
Oh,
12 page,
wonderful.
yeah, we have a 12-page guide, which is based on my book, Thriving with Anxiety, which is free. Anybody can have it, take it. DHROSMARIN.com, DHRosmarin.com. Yeah, so check it out. A lot of people we've had like nearly 10,000 downloads, so that's pretty cool. So it's been trending, it's kind of nice. And a
Amazing.
lot of
Yeah.
people reaching out, so sending emails, sending text messages about what they like about it, what they think we should change. So we love to hear from, like, my marketing team, my whole team loves to hear from folks who are engaging with the Thriving with Anxiety material. So definitely reach out, and I'm happy to connect.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for the time. I'll be sure to put all of that in the show notes because I'd love for everybody to run over there and grab that
Sure.
PDF and kind of get the opportunity to scroll through it and learn from it. So thank you again for being here, and everyone else, be curious, not judgmental. See you next time.